All right. Today, today we're going to look at a double portion, Achare Mot and Kedoshim. And I'm always amazed. Every time there's a teaching in the Torah, we experience something in our lives that helps us to really live the Torah. That's why I love it so much. And I noticed that Leviticus 16, when we begin this parasha, Achare Mot, it's introducing Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, which we know better as the Day of God's Covering. Now, on this special Moed, the Kohen HaGadol would change his clothes, his vestments to white linen. He paid extra attention to bathing, to cleanliness. And we're introduced to two goats that become the stars of the show. And I'm not going to talk about these two goats today. We went over it on Wednesday night during our study, and they're so interesting, but there's so much more to say. And it was declared to be a Shabbat, day of complete rest for you, and you shall practice self-denial. It's talking about Yom Kippur. It's a chukat olam. A chukat, the chok, is something we may not have a complete understanding about, but God says we have to do it forever. It's an ordinance for all times. Now, the Hebrew says about it that va'anitem et nafshechem, meaning to impoverish or to afflict our souls. That is, we have to humble ourselves before we can approach the Creator. And I think Rabbi Yashuv must have been referring to this in his Sermon on the Mount when he said, "Blessed or happy are the poor in spirit, for they shall inherit the earth." He was constantly challenging the Pharisees and the Sadducees of his day for changing the Torah. After the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, Yom Kippur was declared to be a day of fasting. But until then, the Kohanim who were serving in the Mishkan or the temple would eat the special offerings that the people brought, and they joined together with their friends and their family. And we as a nation were to approach the Creator together. This was a communal service. And they had to have their hearts right, humble hearts, to be able to approach Him and to make things right with Him, with God, and with each other. Now, this is the opposite attitude that we read in the very first verse, where it was talking about Nadab and Abihu. The second portion of the double portion is Kedoshim, referring to sanctification or to being set apart. And in Leviticus 18, we begin with the Lord spoke to Moses and said, "Speak to the Israelites and saying, I am Yud He Vav He, your God. You must not behave as they do in Egypt, where you used to live. You must not behave as they do in Canaan, where I am taking you. Nor must you follow their hukim, their statutes." Notice that the word hukim is also used for their customs. Hebrew words need to be taken in context, and we'll soon see that with the word kadosh. This verse continues, "You must observe my customs, my mishpatim, and my chukim, my statutes, and follow them. I, the Lord, am your God. From this time on, you will keep my statutes and my customs. Whoever complies with them will find life in them. I am Yud He Vav He." That verse, that phrase, "I am Yud He Vav He," is repeated 15 times in this portion. Again, as opposed to death, as in the case of Nadab and Abihu, He is a God of life. God was warning this new nation not to behave like those who followed the chaotic dictates of their gods in order to appease them. He was given Israel customs that would give us identity and replace chaos with order. At the end of Leviticus 18:26, he says, "You, however, must keep my chukim and my mishpatim and not do any of these hateful things. Neither the citizen nor the stranger, the ger, who resides among you. So the Torah is clear that this message was never meant to be exclusively for Israel and for the Jewish people. There isn't one God, Yud He Vav He, for the Jews, while the other gods are for the rest. That is religion, and that is divisive. Our God wants us to be united, Jew and Gentile together. Anyone can choose to follow God's commandments and ordinances, and they will come under his covering. Imagine what a world it will be when this comes to pass. Leviticus 18 continues, for all these hateful things were done by the people who lived in the land before you, and the land became unclean. If you, speaking to the Israelites, if you make it unclean, will it not vomit you out as it vomited out the nations there before you? Anyone who does any of these abhorrent things, whatever they may be, any person doing them will be cut off from his people. So keep my rules and observe, and do not observe any of the abhorrent practices which were enforced before you came. Then you will not be made unclean by them. Again, I am Yud He Vav He, your God, always reminding us who he is. So how do we know what these hateful things are that God was speaking about? It's simple. They're spelled out right here in the Torah. We'll be reading them in these verses as we go through this double portion. Some were for that period of time, and others can be applied as principles for all time. But when we add or take away anything from the written Torah, we are falling into what is odious to our God. Now, I love my people. Like Yeshua loved the people. He loved the Pharisees. But like him, I'm brokenhearted to see what's happening in the ultra-Orthodox communities, not only in Israel, but around the world. Their strict adherence to ever-expanding traditions and the multitude of rules and regulations that the Creator never asked us to do are holding our people captive. God constantly is reminding us that he set us free from slavery. As in any religion, it is the most pious of people who look down on everyone else who they consider to be less observant or less worthy or less holy than they are. This only serves to alienate people. And as a result, they run away from God and his Torah, and they throw the baby out with the bathwater. And worse than that, we were warned that this would cause us to be spit, to be vomited out of the land, as he did with those who didn't observe his commandments. In chapter 19, we read, the Lord spoke to Moses and said, speak to the entire community of Israel and say, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. To understand the word holiness, there's a key, and it lies in its translation. Some translated it as perfect, as we read in Matthew 5:48. You shall be perfect as I am perfect. Holy or kadosh has nothing to do with perfection. The word kadosh is an adjective. It's completely dependent upon the noun to which it is attached and which gives its meaning. For example, in Deuteronomy 23, it says there must be no sacred prostitute, and the word there is kadeshah, among the women of Israel, and no sacred prostitute, the word is kadesh, among the men of Israel. Both stem from the same root, kadosh. And Genesis 38:21 spoke of Judah when he sent a certain servant to look for the Kedishah, the prostitute with whom he had had relations. Kedishah here is also from the word kadosh. Their behavior is distinguished by to whom or to what they are separated or set apart from. 4. When we belong to the God of Israel, our behavior reflects his characteristics, such as integrity, morality, and so many more. When we are called by him, we are expected to do what is right in his sight. The closer we draw near to the Creator, the more our conduct will reflect his character and his name. That's why he constantly states that he is jealous or zealous for his name. As we read in Leviticus 19:11, you shall not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of your God. I am Adonai, Yud He Vav He. That's the third commandment, which tells us that his reputation was involved here. That's the same thing as our name. When we do something that gives us a bad reputation, when we change our life, our reputation changes with it, either good or for bad. We have been set apart by him, and he shows us the areas in our life that we need to change in order to reflect his qualities. We will never in this life, in these bodies, attain perfection, not like some religions promise. But we can work on ourselves with the help of our friends and our God. It's a slow process, but well worth the effort. Immediately after speaking to the Israelite community about Kadosh, Leviticus 19:3 jumps into the importance of honoring our mother and father and keeping the Shabbat. These are the two middle hukim between the first three, the mitzvot of knowing who our God is, and the last 5 mishpatim on how to treat our neighbor. These fourth and fifth of the 10 commandments are for our personal well-being and that of our families. Rabbi Yeshua summed these up by stating, you are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your resources, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. Those sums up the 10 commandments. The next verses continue with what not to do by imitating the immoral behavior of the nations around us. They expand upon the last 5 of the 10 commandments regarding how to treat others. God's message is clear and simple. However, as our rabbi, how he taught, society has for the most part become amoral, in which there's a complete incapacity to return to morality. Excuse me, let me take a drink. At least in an immoral society, people can still acknowledge that they're being immoral, but they choose to do the opposite. The people of Israel were called to be a nation set apart, kadosh, to reflect righteous behavior to the world. That's our challenge. When we cease to do that, we lose our purpose, our identity. You know, Israel has the most moral army in the world, the IDF. And they do the most good wherever there's a need, even though they're often accused of doing the opposite. However, the general population of the modern state of Israel have accepted behavior that is destructive to their society in the guise of being open-minded. We see the same attitude, the same behavior around the world. Being holy is equivalent to being chosen. We were not chosen to be like the others, to do as others do. Although the modern state of Israel is like a newborn, she has a long history when compared with other nations. But like her biblical ancestors, she has today returned to the same days when the prophet Samuel when the Israelites cried out, "Give us a king." And Samuel was so upset. But the Creator reminded him that the people had rejected him, preferring to be like other nations. We had and still have forgotten that we are a unique Am Segula, a treasured people who have inherited the role of shining God's light to the rest of the world. Holiness has nothing to do with what we eat or how we dress. Those were for the times when we were being first separated and formed as a new nation with a specific role. But today, it has to do with our behavior. We can boast that we eat kosher, but if we cheat others in business, how are we being holy? Rabbi Yeshua taught that when he said, "It is not what enters the mouth that defiles the person, but what comes out of the mouth, that defiles the person." The Creator is teaching us that holiness has to do with tzedek, tzedek tirdof, justice, justice you must pursue. Most people today play at religion, but true teshuvah, or turning back to God, involves first recognizing our faults, our weaknesses, and not blaming others for our behavior. Then we acknowledge what we have done before God and the others to whom we need to make restitution. We show that we can be genuine and understand that the Creator is asking us to choose life, to imitate what is good. When we are truly walking, and the word for walking is halakha, when we are truly walking with God, we become humble, following the example of our great teachers, Moshe and Yeshua. We all hold on to things from our past. With God's help and those around us, we can leave them behind, like the Israelites were learning to do on their journey, their halakha, through the wilderness. God's gift of free will allows us to be responsible for our choices. The Creator said, "I am the God who set you free." He doesn't want us to be slaves anymore. The only way we can be responsible is when we are free. And as I said before, the phrase, "I am Yud He Vav He, your God," is repeated 15 times in this portion to show us that we are not walking alone. God sees what we do. He knows the intentions of our hearts. And it is by these that He judges us. The message is a simple one, but is not easy to do. Let us not imitate those whose lives and behavior clearly demonstrate that they do not know the Ten Commandments, God's moral code. That's what's going to lead us down the wrong path. Let's ask ourselves, whose value am I imitating? The Creator's or the world's? Shabbat Shalom.